Hello, we didn't get married?
Get married? That's ridiculous.
By the way, Griffith Park has the best picnic areas.
Thank you. You are most insignificant.
Chandler was going to be the easiest part to cast because it's not just a character, he's got jokes. He's got like actual real jokes. So I thought, here we go, this is going to be great. And we saw actor after actor, and it wasn't funny.
We had worked with Matthew Perry on Dream On, and when Matthew reads that dialogue, it sparkles, and it comes alive. And for the first time through the casting process, we knew there was a character there and that this was the only guy to play it.
I just want $1 million.
Spins the lines in a way that they're his, and there's so many comedy skills there.
It is the night of September 22nd, 1994. NBC airs the pilot of a new sitcom about 6 young people living in Manhattan, drinking coffee, and fumbling through their 20s. No one at the network is particularly confident. Test audiences gave the pilot a below-average score. The creators had spent months rewriting the script. The cast was assembled through a chain of near misses, last-minute reversals, and contractual chaos that would have made any studio lawyer sweat. The show almost had a completely different cast. Its title changed at least 3 times. The network nearly passed on it. And when it finally did air, the reviews were mixed at best. 10 years and 236 episodes later, 52.5 million Americans sat in front of their televisions to watch 6 friends say goodbye, making it the 4th most watched series finale in television history. Advertisers paid $2 million for a single 30-second commercial slot. The cast had become the highest-paid ensemble in the history of television. Over its run, Friends earned 62 Emmy nominations and won 6 times, including the Outstanding Comedy Series Award for its 8th season. It launched hairstyles, catchphrases, coffee shop culture, and a global conversation about what it meant to be young, broke, and figuring it all out in a city that didn't care whether you made it or not. But before any of that could happen, the right 6 people had to be in the right room at exactly the right time. And almost none of them were supposed to be there. A show born from a canceled one. The story of Friends begins not with a triumph, but with a cancellation. In late 1993, NBC dropped a sitcom called Family Album, which had been created by David Crane and Marta Kauffman. The 2 writers were left without a show, and without a plan. Rather than pitch a safe, familiar idea, Kauffman and Crane went back to something they understood personally. The disorienting, exciting, terrifying experience of being in your 20s in a big city. When your friends become your family because your actual family is somewhere else, and adulthood is not at all what you imagined it would be. They called the first draft Insomnia Cafe. It became 6 of 1. It became Friends Like Us. It finally became simply Friends. The concept they pitched to NBC was almost deliberately unglamorous. 6 people in their 20s making their way in Manhattan. No high-concept premise. No quirky twist. Just people, relationships, apartments, and a coffee shop. Kevin Bright, their producing partner who had worked with them on the HBO series Dream On, joined as executive producer. The 3 of them walked into NBC in December 1993 and pitched 7 pages. NBC commissioned a full script, but even after the script was written, the real work was just beginning. Because they needed to find 6 people who together would become one of the most beloved ensembles in the history of American television. In that process came within inches of complete collapse. The casting process that nearly fell apart. For each of the 6 main roles, casting director Ellie Canner reviewed more than 1,000 submissions. Those were narrowed to 75 per role for callbacks, and then further reduced to 3 or 4 finalists who would read in front of Les Moonves, president of Warner Brothers Television. What sounds like an orderly process was, in reality, a maze of overlapping contracts, missed opportunities, and decisions that could have sent the show in an entirely different direction. Ross, the man who had already quit television. David Schwimmer was the first actor locked in, but getting him there required a personal lobbying campaign. By the time the Friends producers came looking, Schwimmer had moved back to Chicago to concentrate on theater after a string of failed television pilots. He was done with the medium. The producers, by multiple accounts, sent gift baskets to his apartment and called repeatedly. Director James Burrows, who had been hired to helm the pilot based on his work on Cheers, eventually persuaded Schwimmer to come back. He was cast as Ross Geller on March 18, 1994, becoming the first member of the main ensemble to be confirmed. Phoebe, the recommendation that changed everything. Lisa Kudrow came to Friends through an unusual route. David Crane's husband, Jeffrey Cleric, who was a writer on another NBC show called Mad About You, recommended her directly to the creators. Kudrow was already playing a recurring character on Mad About You, a waitress named Ursula, and the recommendation was good enough that she was called in without the standard audition process. Her reading for Phoebe Buffay was, according to the producers, the easiest decision of the entire casting process. Though Phoebe and Ursula would later become identical twins in the Friends universe, the role of Phoebe was built from scratch around Kudrow's specific, irreplaceable energy. Monica, the role nobody wanted, Courtney Cox, arrived at Friends through a path that began with a different character entirely. She had originally been approached to read for Rachel Green, but Cox pushed back and asked to read for Monica instead, sensing that Monica was the role that suited her better. The producers agreed. What is remarkable in retrospect is that Cox, despite being arguably the most recognizable face in the initial cast, having appeared in a Bruce Springsteen music video that was in heavy rotation on MTV, is the only one of the 6 main cast members who never received an individual Emmy nomination for her performance during the show's original run. Monica Geller was central to the show's identity. The Academy simply never acknowledged it. Joey, down to his last $11. By the time Matt LeBlanc walked into his audition for Joey Tribbiani, the producers had already seen a long line of actors who were handsome enough for the role but who couldn't land the comedy. LeBlanc had been struggling as a working actor for years. On the day he got the part, he reportedly had $11 left in his bank account. He auditioned against another actor in the final callback at NBC, and, in the words of Kevin Bright, he killed it. One of the other actors who also read for Joey that day later appeared on the show in a recurring capacity in season 6, playing a Joey lookalike in the episode where Monica and Chandler discover a man who enters their apartment uninvited and helps himself to their food. Chandler, the role Matthew Perry had to pray for. Matthew Perry's path to Chandler Bing is one of the more extraordinary stories in television casting history. The creators considered Perry for Chandler from the very beginning. They thought he was a near-perfect fit. But Perry was already contractually committed to another pilot, a science fiction comedy called LAX 2194, in which he played a baggage handler working at an airport in the year 2194 that served extraterrestrial passengers. While he was stuck on that project, the producers moved forward with other options. Craig Bierko, who Perry had personally coached for the role, sitting through his friends' practice runs and feeding him lines, was offered the part. Bierko turned it down. He did not want to be part of an ensemble. He wanted to be the star of his own show. His replacement show, the ironically titled Best Friends, lasted 1 season and has since been entirely forgotten. LAX 2194 was canceled before it aired. Perry, suddenly free, immediately called about Friends. He was available. He was cast. By his own account, it was the first time in his adult life he had prayed, asking for the chance to play a role he believed he was born for. Rachel, the role NBC tried to give to someone else. The casting of Rachel Green was the most fraught of all. Jennifer Aniston was the creator's first choice, and she desperately wanted the role. There was one significant problem. She was under contract to CBS for a show called Muddling Through, a summer comedy that had not yet finished airing. CBS had first claim on her time, which meant that even if she shot the Friends pilot, she could be pulled away from the show at any moment if Muddling Through was renewed. NBC's own preference, communicated directly to the producers, was to cast Jamie Gertz as Rachel. The creators held their breath for 24 hours, until Gertz passed on the part. Tiffany Thiessen, widely known as Kelly Kapowski from Saved by the Bell, also screen tested for the role but was considered too young to pair convincingly with the rest of the cast. Tia Leone was approached but had already signed with an ABC show. The producers shot the pilot with Aniston despite the contractual uncertainty. Then NBC took the unusual step of actively working to eliminate the problem. The network's scheduling team deliberately programmed major competing content in the same time slot as Muddling Through on CBS, helping drive that show's ratings down and hastening its cancellation. Muddling Through was canceled. Aniston was free. She signed her Friends contract and the ensemble was finally complete. The pilot nobody believed in. With the cast in place, Friends taped its pilot on May 4th, 1994 at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, in front of a live audience. The experience was not uniformly encouraging. Test screenings produced below-average scores from focus groups. NBC executives had reservations. The creators were asked to make changes. One of the notable creative adjustments made before production began came from pilot director James Burrows, the veteran behind Cheers and Taxi. Burrows looked at the original character breakdown for Joey Tribbiani and felt that as written, Joey was too similar to Chandler, too sarcastic, too verbally quick. Burrows pushed for Joey to be, in his words, dumbed up a little. The adjustment gave the ensemble a wider range of comic registers and helped define the relationship dynamic that would carry the show for a decade. Executive producer Coven Bright submitted the completed pilot to NBC on May 11, 1994, 2 days before the network was due to announce its fall schedule. Satisfied with what they saw, NBC ordered 12 additional episodes for the first season. The show premiered that September to an audience of approximately 22 million viewers, landing it as the 15th most watched show of its premiere week. Not a hit, not a disaster, a question mark. And then something interesting began to happen. 6 people, 1 frequency. What made Friends work at the level it did was not any single performance, though several of them were exceptional. It was the consistency of the ensemble. The way 6 actors with profoundly different instincts and comic rhythms found a shared register and stayed in it for 10 years. Jennifer Aniston built Rachel Green from a character who was easy to dislike, spoiled, self-absorbed, professionally adrift, into one of the most complete, comedic, and dramatic performances on network television. Her Emmy win in 2002 for Outstanding Lead Actors in a Comedy Series came after 4 previous nominations, by which point the Academy had run out of credible ways to keep ignoring what she was doing every week. Lisa Kudrow's Phoebe Buffet is one of the genuinely original comic creations in American sitcom history. What Kudrow did with the role went far beyond the eccentric hippie on the page. She built an internal logic for Phoebe that was completely consistent and entirely her own, making even the most surreal story choices feel grounded and human. She won the Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series in 1998 and received 6 total nominations for the role, the most of any cast member. Matthew Perry did something with Chandler Bing that is more technically difficult than it appears. He made a character defined by deflection and sarcasm genuinely emotionally available. Chandler used humor as armor in the way that real people do, and Perry never let audiences forget that the armor was covering something tender. His chemistry with Courtney Cox, particularly from season 4 onward as Monica and Chandler's relationship became the show's emotional center, was the kind of on-screen connection that cannot be manufactured. David Schwimmer navigated Ross Geller through 10 seasons of romantic humiliation, professional pride, and genuine heartbreak with a precision that the show's comedy often obscured. Ross was frequently the butt of the joke, but Schwimmer made sure he was never merely the butt of the joke. There was always something at stake for him. His 4 Emmy nominations reflect an Academy that recognized the craft even when the character was being crushed under a leather sofa. Matt LeBlanc turned Joey into something that could have been a one-note caricature, the dim, charming one, and gave him an emotional generosity and a strange dignity that made the character beloved across every demographic the show reached. When the spin-off Joey aired after Friends ended, audiences discovered how much of what worked had depended on what LeBlanc brought specifically to that ensemble dynamic. And Courtney Cox, whose Monica Geller was the organizational spine of the entire show, the one who fed everyone, hosted everything, and held the group together through sheer force of competitive perfectionism, gave the role everything she had for 10 years and received 0 individual Emmy recognition for it. The omission remains one of the more glaring blind spots in the Academy's record. What Friends actually changed. Friends premiered at a specific moment in the evolution of the American sitcom. The dominant format through the late 1980s and early 1990s was the family sitcom. Parents, children, a living room, lessons learned. Seinfeld was already pushing against that model by being explicitly about nothing, about the social absurdity of adult life rather than the domestic warmth of family life. Friends occupied a different space. It was about chosen family, about the people you collect in your 20s who become as important as the people you were born into. This wasn't just a narrative choice. It reflected something real about how young people were living, particularly in cities, where geographic mobility and delayed marriage meant that the traditional family sitcom was increasingly disconnected from the actual experience of its target audience. Friends saw that gap and stepped into it. The show also introduced storylines that were not standard sitcom territory in 1994. Ross's ex-wife Carol came out as gay and entered a committed relationship with her partner Susan. The two women got married in season 2, one of the first same-sex wedding ceremonies depicted on mainstream American network television. The episode aired during the same week that the real-world debate over marriage equality was becoming nationally prominent. Friends didn't editorialize. It simply showed two people who loved each other getting married, surrounded by friends who were happy for them. The episode received an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Writing in a Comedy Series. The show also dealt with surrogacy, adoption, infertility, and career failure with a consistency and naturalism that most sitcoms avoided. It did not pretend that its characters' lives were entirely comfortable or that things always worked out. They often didn't. The laughs were real, but so were the stakes. The show that never really ended, Friends, concluded on May 6, 2004. The finale was watched by 52.5 million Americans, a number that ranked it as the fourth most watched series finale in television history, behind MASH, Cheers, and Seinfeld. The cast went their separate ways. The show went into syndication. And then, over the following 2 decades, something unusual happened. Rather than fading the way most sitcoms do, Friends grew. When the show arrived on Netflix in 2015, a new generation of viewers discovered it and made it one of the platform's most watched titles worldwide. Netflix paid a reported $100 million to keep it on their platform for a single year in 2019, before the rights moved to HBO Max. When Warner Brothers announced that Friends would be leaving Netflix, the backlash from streaming audiences was significant enough to make international news. The 2021 reunion special, Friends, The Reunion, aired on HBO Max and was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Variety Special. All 6 cast members received a nomination as producers. For Courtney Cox, it was the first Emmy recognition of any kind for her work on Friends. The show runs constantly, somewhere in the world, every single day. Fans who were not born when the finale aired have grown up with the show as background comfort. The way an earlier generation grew up with reruns of I Love Lucy or The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Central Perk-themed coffee shops have opened in cities around the world. The orange couch has become an icon. The phrase, "on a break," has entered the language as a shorthand for a particular kind of romantic uncertainty that has nothing to do with Ross and Rachel, and everything to do with how people actually talk to each other. 62 nominations. One reason: the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences nominated Friends 62 times over its 10-year run. The show won 6 times. By pure conversion rate, that is not an impressive haul. But the nominations themselves tell a story about a show that was consistently recognized as being at the top of its craft across every department, in every season, year after year, for a decade. The writers who worked on Friends have gone on to create, run, and shape some of the most significant comedies of the 21st century. The directors who found their footing there brought that discipline to shows and films that have defined the era. The 6 actors who spent 10 years making each other funnier, sharper, and more human built careers that none of them would have had without the specific pressure and privilege of that ensemble. What Friends did, ultimately, was something deceptively simple. It showed 6 people who were imperfect, often confused, occasionally selfish, and completely the 6 most animated models ever existed. It didn't dispose this tension. It lived in it for 10 years, and it found the comedy and the heartbreak and the warmth that live inside it simultaneously. You can write that on a napkin and it sounds like nothing. You can try to replicate it and discover, as every network has discovered in the 20 years since the finale, that it is nearly impossible. 62 nominations is not a number. It is a record of how many times a room full of television professionals watched what was happening on that set and could not find a reason not to acknowledge it.